the floor over you.
Walking the floor.
I'm walking the floor. Walking the floor over you.
Hola, senors and senoritas! Yes, yes. It's Walking the Floor time once again with me, Mr. Chris Shiflett, right here at Walking the Floor headquarters, where, yes, it is summertime in Los Angeles in March. The rain is gone. The drought is gone, I think. And it's beautiful outside. So get out there and enjoy your day, but make sure you take your iPhone with you so you can listen to this podcast while you're doing it. What's going on, people? I got much too much going on. We got a tour coming up. I got a new record coming out. I got videos up on the internet. Just so you know, I'm about to relaunch my website. By the time this comes out, it might be relaunched. Probably not, at the rate it's going. It's kind of taking a while, but probably middle of the week. Let's go with middle of the week. But my videos are going to live there. There's going to be ticket links for the tour. If you want to get out there and buy some tickets in advance, there are tickets left for all the West Coast stuff and there's some of the East Coast stuff, so get out there and get them. Get your pre-order copy of my record on iTunes, and you will get a free bonus track. So there's all that stuff going down. Plenty to keep you busy while you're diddling away at your office job somewhere pretending to work. But I know what you're doing. All right, before we get to the interview today, let's sell some guitar picks with Sounds.com. You know I need some Sounds.com. You know I need some Sounds.com. Got to get some strings and fresh plectrums. On a Telecaster I can strum. Head on over to the Sounds.com. Sounds.com. All right, let's get to the interview. So when I interviewed Marty Stuart recently, it was kind of on the early side, like first thing in the morning. And I think he'd had a gig the night before and maybe a gig that night too. And he showed up just dressed to the nines, bitchin' cowboy hat, boots, the whole deal. He just looked like the honky-tonk rock and roller that he is. And I was like, wow, you look great, man. First thing in the morning. He goes, I gotta be me all day. I was like, God, what a great line. I love that line. I'm definitely gonna steal that line from Marty Stuart for sure next time we go on the road. We had a great conversation. What can I say about Marty Stuart that you don't already know? He's a huge inspiration to me personally. He's just one of the best guitar players in the biz. I would say there's probably nobody in country music right now that's doing more to preserve that classic sound than Marty Stuart. But somehow he always keeps it fresh. And nowhere is that more apparent than on his brand new record that just came out called Way Out West, that was produced by Mike Campbell of the Heartbreakers, actually. Marty's just such a great ambassador for country music. He even let me sit in with him on a song at the end of this, so check that out. I didn't exactly know the chord changes, but I did my best to keep up. This is Marty Stuart on Walking the Floor.
Let me tell you about Diamond Bill Coulter and Hurricane Kate. They had 'em a circus tent out there in the Golden State. They hired me.
If there's any music going down, we got to do it together.
Yeah, okay. You got it. I'll try to keep up.
Oh, no. and whatever you want to play, I don't care, man.
Oh, okay.
Whatever we'll stumble into one to play.
Okay, cool.
We don't have to plan it.
That was the thing I loved about your TV show. I started watching your TV show like right around the time I started really getting into like old honky tonk stuff, and so my reference was like I grew up listening to like heavy metal and Kiss and Aerosmith and stuff like that. So my reference points with country music are kind of odd because they're not like, it's not like the thing that I didn't listen to country radio growing up. So watching your show like filled out my knowledge of the genre in a big way.
Well, two things. That's what the show was about. For years, I'd go around going, why don't somebody do a 21st century version of the Porter Wagoner show? Stick it in a corner of it. I know how to do that. And then one day I went, I can do this. And with that little network came by, I went, this is too good to be true. The first day I discovered it, I watched the whole FFA convention. I went, this guy's nuts. So we did it. But the whole point was there was about that much time left before every bit of that old stuff went over the cliff. And I said, we got to get it. So we got in there and we did 156 episodes. And it proved to be the right thing to do because it was the last time Kitty Wells was on TV. Charlie Leuven was on TV.
Right.
On and on and on. There's been so many that we just got in at the tail end of it and got it. And we knew when there was hay bales and wagon wheels, it was like, we know what we're doing. But it's interesting enough, it entertained the old country audience. They got that show, hook, line, and sinker. The modern country consumer didn't know what the hell they were watching. The guy that watched this Luke Bryan or Brad Paisley, they probably thought it was, and the country music industry probably went, oh, you got to be kidding, more fucking hay bales. Right. And it was the rockers, guys like you, and the real guys, the rock stars that would relate to this kind of country music because it was authentic.
Well, I thought it was cool that you would have guys like Stonewall Jackson on.
Yeah.
But then you would also have guys like Brad Paisley, I think. I remember seeing on there, and he would come on, and it's like the one time you ever get to see him play that style of country that obviously he knows like the back of his hand, but it's not really what he does, or any of those folks do. I thought that was a really interesting mix.
It was a very definite line in the dirt, outlaw. I hate that word outlaw, but it was a very renegade kind of thing to do in the face of that town. And but it was the thing to do.
But it also predated. I mean, I'm sure obviously you're aware. There's like this whole rise of alt country, outlaw country, whatever you want to call it. All these younger artists now drawing from that sound. Margot Price and Sturgill Simpson, guys like that. And it was like a little bit ahead of that.
Yeah.
It's like you were hipster before it was hipster.
Well, that's been the problem for you. That's what Roger Miller always said. He said I was always 15 minutes ahead of my time.
Right.
Yeah. 1, 2.
Cool. Yeah, looks like it's all working good. So what brings you to SoCal? I know you got you have a new album coming out.
Tonight we're doing a press event at the Grammy Museum over in Los Angeles, and I'm looking forward to it because my buddy Scott Goldman is now the head of the Grammy Museum, so it's kind of one of his first events. And there's going to be an exhibit. I think it's called Marty Stuart, A Superlative Odyssey. The exhibit opens in May the 10th or something like that. So he's coming down to Mississippi to my warehouse to where all the archives are stored and all the collection is. So we're going to give it the best we got to give it a cool exhibit out here in May.
Wait, okay, let's talk about that because that was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you. Now, I heard ages ago that you had gone around years ago, maybe got out your like musicians union directory and called up a bunch of old timers that used to tour back in like the 50s and 60s and 70s and bought up all their stage clothes and have all that stuff in a warehouse somewhere in Nashville. Is that true?
Well, in general, that's right. But I was always just a fan. I mean, I was raised in this little town called Philadelphia, Mississippi. And it was a part of the touring circuit, of the Nashville guys. And so there was a county fair and a Choctaw Indian fair. So the Nashville Stars would come down there when I was a kid. So whether it was asking them for a guitar pick or, an autograph or buying a record, getting them to sign it, I was always a fan. But I got a job so early in Nashville, when I was 13 with Lester Flatt. And I would notice those guys, Lester would write out a set list and throw it in the garbage can. I said, can I have that? It looked important to me. It was a document that looked important. Or they would wear, their ties one too many times on TV with too much makeup and throw them away. Can I have that? So it started that innocently, just kind of family treasures kind of things from people I admired. But what really happened in the early 1980s, that urban cowboy scare came through, and it kind of wiped down the old world of country music. So there was kind of a split in the family, if you will. It's kind of and so all of a sudden the old guys, Ernest Tubb and Roy Acuff and Bill Monroe and, that Lester Flatt, Jimmy Dickens, all those people, they were kind of considered old-timers out to pasture, irrelevant, just kind of washed-up Opry stars. And that didn't quite ring true with me because, first of all, they were the people that raised me, and second of all, I knew that the power of their music was going to sustain far beyond anybody's trend. But it was time for a change at the box office in country music. And I had just got a job with Johnny Cash and his band. So due to my age and the look I had going and all that sound I had going at that time, trying to find a record, things were different. So I was a part of both worlds a little bit. But I noticed it the first time when I went to London with Johnny Cash. It was the first time I'd ever been, to England. I heard a southern accent on the street over there, and it was a guy named Isaac Tigert. And Isaac was the co-founder of the Hard Rock Cafe. Mm. And he said, come see what we're doing. And so I went into the Hard Rock in London, and there, on the wall there was, costumes by the Beatles and the Stones and artifacts by Otis Redding and, The Who and Jimi Hendrix. And I thought, that is really cool. Even though it's a hamburger joint, that's really cool. But all the way home to America, I kept thinking about things I had seen in thrift shops, the costumes that, the old stars used to wear. Their instruments were going to Japan. So I got serious about collecting. And the thing that did it for me, there was a junk store in Nashville on 8th Avenue where I bought Patsy Cline's train case for $75. So my mom worked at a bank, and I said, Mom, I need to borrow some money. And so the first thing I bought was one of Porter Wagoner's band members, all their uniforms. And it started in the bedroom at the house, and now it is in a warehouse in Mississippi. There's probably 20,000 items. Serious stuff.
Is that the stuff that's going to be on display at the exhibit? Some of it. And we're working on this place called the Marty Stuart Center down in my hometown of Philadelphia, Mississippi. And that's where it will be the permanent home of it. And, okay, so let's talk about that a little bit growing up. So you said you grew up in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I understand you were almost like a mandolin prodigy as a kid. I mean, you started touring when you were 12 or something, right? Yeah, I was just a fast talker. I wasn't that good. Actually, I started touring with a group called the Sullivan Family Gospel Singers, and they were like TV stars down in the South, and they were like Pentecostal church house stars, bluegrass stars. And so that summer I toured. We did bluegrass festivals and camp meeting revivals. George Wallace campaign rallies. I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, that was the summer I fell in love with the road. Fell in love with people like you, cool people that we could stay up late at night and talk music 24 hours a day. And there were girls and applause and a little bit of money at the end of the trip. So I thought, man, this is my life. I'm cut out for this. How'd you convince your parents to go along with that program? Well, the Sullivan family was, they were very respectable people. And again, the setting was churches and bluegrass festivals and revivals and campaign rallies. So I was in and out a lot. But I think they probably wouldn't let me go into work with the Foo Fighters at that time. but the Sullivan family, it was a different deal. So that was one part. So that kind of got everybody at our house used to me traveling. But the hard part came in at the end of that summer of 1972 when the Sullivan family put me out to go back to school, start the 9th grade. And man, I thought, this is wrong. I felt like the circus had dropped me off, and I tried to study at night knowing that they were out there playing, music somewhere, and it wrecked me. I imagine you, by that time, just with what little experience you had, you must have been so much more worldly than the kids you were going to school with. How was that to try to go home and be a kid again after having that experience of being out on the road? You can't go, you can't go back, can you? No. And once you've seen that over the mountain, you can go back, but it's never the same. And I knew that it was my life, and I think that's what made my mom, she understood because she knew that was my life. And that's from the time I was a little boy. I mean, I was practicing my autograph in the 3rd grade, man. I wanted to get out of there. So, I mean, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And then, so how did it go from that to winding up in Lester Flatt's band? Well, Lester, one of the coolest parts about country music, the circuit back then, and today as well, is the bluegrass festival circuit. A lot of people that went on to be like country music singing stars: Vince Gill, Ricky Skaggs, Keith Whitley, myself. There's some more I'm missing. Alison Krauss. We all started at bluegrass festivals. Well, even now, Chris Stapleton and Sturgill Simpson, those guys I know have roots in absolutely. Bluegrass. And the thing about bluegrass festivals at that particular time is you had all these legendary characters that we'd all grown up listening to, like Old Testament kind of figures that you look at the back of records, you go, man, he did that in 1937. He's still here. But those guys were so accessible, and they were so down to earth, and they were knowledgeable and kind.
And they were all very nice to me. When I was a kid, they showed me things. So that side of the world, again, and so Lester Flatt was a part of that package. And his band member, a guy named Roland White, was really kind to me. He showed me mandolin lessons, like in that summer of 1972. So Roland just happened to say one day, well, maybe someday you could come up and ride the bus with us. I'll ask Lester, you ask your mom and dad. So I'm like 15 minutes into the 9th grade, and I was reading this country music song roundup in the middle of my history book just to hang on, try to show up. And I got lost in the story, and my teacher came up and knocked it out of my hands. So if you get your mind off that trash and get it on to history, you might make something out of yourself. Smart ass said, well, I'd rather make history than learn about it. So dismissed. So I went home and called Roland White, and he asked Lester, and he invited me to Nashville. And I called my mom, of course, and she knew I was lying. I said, Lester Flatt called and wants me to come to but it was for supposedly for the weekend. You gotta sell it how you gotta sell it. Sell it. I told you I could talk. And so the idea was to go up there for the weekend and come home and get my head together and go to school. But during that weekend, just Lester Flatt offered me a job, and there was no looking back.
And so you toured with him until around the time he passed away, right?
Yeah, I went to work on Labor Day weekend, 72, and he died in 1979.
And so how did you wind up in Johnny Cash's band after?
Well,
you made your first couple of records, like bluegrass records, around that time too, right?
Yeah, just things to sell on the road.
Right.
Inside of, those touring bands. Well, when Lester died, I looked around the world of bluegrass. Bill Monroe didn't need anybody in his band. The Osborne brothers didn't need anybody. Jim and Jesse didn't need anybody. Jimmy Martin didn't need anybody. And there was really nothing to do. So the one person I went to was Vassar Clements. The Circle Being Broken record was still smoking hot. And Vassar had developed this like hillbilly jazz kind of touring division. And I'd never played guitar on stage, since I was 9 years old. And so I bought me an electric guitar. And Vassar gave me a job. I don't know why, because I wasn't worth a flip. But I toured with him for a little bit. Then Doc and Merle Watson, I played with him for just a minute. And then I was actually going to come out here to L.A. and try to get a job with Bob Dylan. And in the meantime, I walked into this guitar shop in Nashville. And a buddy of mine was building Johnny Cash a guitar. I said, I want to go with you when you take that guitar. Because I told him the first 2 records I ever owned was Flatt and Scruggs and Johnny Cash. And they're like family to me. So I kept up with the progress of the guitar and went over to Jack Clement's studio with Danny Farrington when he delivered the guitar. And John was there. And he shook hands with me. He just kept looking at me. He says, where are you from? I went, Mississippi. He said, I thought so. He said, where you been? I said, getting ready. And we hit it off that day, and we played an afternoon full of music, and we went riding around that night, me and him and Jack Clement. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, I guess it was, I got a call from his guitar player. I said, John wants to know if you want to go to work in our band. I went, yeah. And I said, and that was the last day I had with Doc and Merle Watson. I said, when? He said, how about tomorrow? I went, sounds good to me. I was in Cedar Rapids. I said, where are you guys playing? He said, Des Moines. So it was like a 2-hour car ride, and that was it.
It's fate.
Yeah.
I mean, so what do you think? That must have been like a master class in showmanship and musicianship, like what you learned with touring with guys like Lester Flatt and Johnny Cash. I mean, what do you think your biggest takeaway as a guy who's gone on to be a solo artist in his own right for so long now? What was your biggest takeaway from those years?
All of those guys were master. They were basically the same people. They were master architects. It was, if you were a jazz player, it'd be like hanging out with Louis Armstrong or something, or Miles, or if you were. But they were salt of the earth kind of people, very practical. And I've said it a lot of times. Lester had a 3rd grade education, but he was truly one of the wisest people I've ever known. And his wisdom and he was one of the guys that helped invent country music. And American music, if you look at it in a broader term. So just those little basic show business lessons and life lessons that he didn't so much say, here's how it is. It's kind of the old Navajo way. You learn by watching and listening. And when I went to work with John, it was like as you say, it was like the master thesis, because Lester was known, nationally and sort of globally. Flatt and Scruggs were, but John was a global star. And I was 19 or 20 years old when I went across the Czechoslovakian border with him for the first time, and I thought everybody knew him, and they wouldn't let him across till he sang them a song. And it's like, man, this is the serious end of the pool here. So just, and the thing that I noticed about those guys is it never depended on hit records. It never depended on one particular thing. They were bigger than all that. They were beyond all that. They kind of had diplomatic status beyond all that. That the trite things of whatever the industry thought it was. And they were the exception to the rule. And so when, radio hits in my life started slowing down, I went, it freaked me out for a few minutes, and I thought, well, just go back to what you grew up doing. You go bigger, you become the culture instead of just the industry. And so those are the kind of things.
I mean, do you think that country music at that time, and say, you said it was like a transitional time with urban cowboy and all that stuff happening, but did country music, did the industry still have a greater respect for its elders? It seems like it used to, more so than today.
I think that's where the Grand Ole Opry and the Country Music Hall of Fame came in, because it was always, country music is a Monday morning industry. It's whoever has the new hit Monday morning. So it's perpetual. It goes on and on and on. But I think country music has done a better job than a lot of genres at taking care of its elders. It's getting harder. It's getting harder to get anybody, to get any attention. But for a long, long time, the elders were loved and respected, which is the way it should be.
Sure. And Johnny Cash was more than just your employer. I mean, at one point you were married to his daughter, and you guys were like family.
To the day he died.
Right. Did that complicate things professionally, or was that just...
He had so many son-in-laws come through that house. I think I was dubbed old number 9. One of the coolest things that right before June Carter got sick, she called me one day. She said, I want to start a band. I said, okay. She said, I want you to be in it. I said, tell me about it. She says, I want to call it June Carter and her ex-son-in-laws. It'll be you and Rodney Crowell and Nick Lowe. I went, I'm in.
Yeah.
It never happened, but I thought it was a good concept.
That's a great idea. Let's talk about that period. So all throughout that time, I mean, you were, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you were also making, as well as being a sideman for Johnny Cash or whoever, you were also making your own records and trying to get there as a solo artist. But I know that there was that time after you played with Cash, maybe you had a couple hits or whatever, maybe between record deals and got divorced. I'm thinking it was probably like a bit of a low period for you, and I think you started playing fiddle in someone else's band. Is that
no.
Before? Am I getting the history a little bit
general,
wrong?
Well, when I was with him, I knew that there were guys in the band that had been there for like 25, 30, 35 years that time or whatever, and they were still talking about doing something. I thought after I leave this band, there's really nowhere to go except down or just a lateral move to somebody else's band of this magnitude, which there weren't very many people of his magnitude around at that time. So I thought, you better figure this out. So I started writing songs, making tapes, trying to get a deal. And, there was a minor deal on Sugar Hill Records and just little records just to try to learn to make records, And the cool part about it was I had a good catalog of phone numbers. So I think my first record, it was like Doc and Merle Watson came and Earl Scruggs came and Johnny Cash came, and I had good help. Taking it on the road was another problem now, But during this time, when the time really came that it was time to fly, I had it in my mind that I knew what to do, rock and country music. And we went behind the curtain, me and a bunch of guys, and we came out with some tapes, and there was a little bit of interest around Nashville, got signed on Columbia. But the general public, George Strait, I think, had come out of Texas wearing that cowboy hat and starched jeans and a starched shirt, and it had nothing to do with rock and country music. And all of a sudden, we were the wrong end of the street. So it was tough. It was tough getting started. There were 2 or 3 false starts. And just completely out of phase with what was public opinion and the taste of country music audience was at that time. But I believed in it, and that was reason enough to do it.
I mean, isn't it a shame that, I mean, by the time you started having your big radio hits and stuff, it was what the late 80s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s, right.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been making records for a long time and been playing for a long time. Like, young artists don't really have that chance nowadays.
No, man, I started in the mailrooms, that kind of thing, or if you look in Native American terms again, I started as a water boy and a scout, and you work your way up to being a chief, and it is absolutely one of the things that you asked me about Lester Flatt's advice. The very first weekend I was on that bus, he told me, he said, it's not about coming to town, I guess he meant Nashville, and making all the money and having all the hits, and then running off, and being forgotten about. He said, the trick is to be welcome every January the 1st. And I was looking at a guy who had been welcome every January the 1st since 1944 around there. So I get it. And so that's what my life, the kind of the exemplary piece of his advice, I wear that every day going, that's what it's really about. It's the long haul.
When you were developing as a songwriter, did you bounce ideas that you had off guys like Lester Flatt and Johnny Cash and some of the legendary guys that you were around?
Oh, that was scary. I mean, Nashville is such a songwriting town.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's the songs. It's, as you well know, Chris, It's the songs. I mean, here's Harlan Howard and Roger Miller and Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash and, Bill Monroe and Lester Flatt. I mean, these guys, again, that invented that into things. So to take this piddly-ass little song up there, and show it's like... I remember one day I wrote a song and somebody said, you should show that to Merle Haggard. I said, that's kind of like showing your rock collection to Mount Rushmore, So,
Right.
But I had to keep digging in, and it was intimidating around the Cash thing because at their house, at the Cash house, there was this thing that they called a guitar pull. You had to sing for your supper. The room could get pretty heady at times. I mean, that room had welcomed Bob Dylan and Roy Orbison and Shel Silverstein and, Joni Mitchell and Graham Nash and Chris Christopherson and on and on and on. So to stick a guitar in your hand and, well, here's my little song, So at that time, it was, I'd find any reason in the world to get out of the room.
Right. But were those guys were those type of songwriters encouraging? I mean, that sounds so nerve-wracking. That would just scare me out of being able to sing one of my songs in front of them. But I imagine it must have been incredibly uplifting to get a little encouragement from Chris Christopherson or somebody like that. They
were encouraging because the whole town was the kind of place if you really had it as a musician or a songwriter, you could always find some encouragement and wisdom to go forward with.
Right.
But you had to earn it.
Sorry, I thought I'd turned my Wi-Fi off there. I hate when the thing.
I thought that was our career taking off to a completely another level.
No, that was the end of the line. Ding ding, it's over.
Give this to your kids.
Yeah. Okay, where was I? We're going through the years.
The songs.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about your songwriting process? Like, how do you do it?
I don't know. It just comes.
Nobody knows. I ask that question every time I interview someone, and I've never gotten a concise answer because I don't think there is one.
You cannot explain it. You write songs. I mean, it's just like a bad. I don't know. It's a gift that comes out of this guy. I like what Hank Williams said. And this guy said, Hank, how do you write them sad songs? He said, Hoss, I don't write them. God sends them down, and I just hang on to the pen. So I thought that's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, or you live them.
You live them.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, they come anywhere. I mean, I've written songs of getting out of the shower, squirting shaving cream, on the mirror, taking my finger right in the words to not forget them, get up in the middle of the night. But I love the open road. This is my cathedral out here. This is my office.
Yeah.
Sitting in the front of a bus going down the road, I see things and I feel things, and I get a better perspective. One of the coolest answers that I ever got about writing songs. I had a wonderful conversation one day with Pete Seeger at Jazz Fest down in New Orleans years ago. And somehow I looked, and it was just me and him sitting on the ground under a tree, just having a conversation, and everybody else was gone. And at the end of it, I had to go there. I asked about Woody, and he gave me the coolest explanation of Woody Guthrie. He said Woody was like a traveling correspondent on a boxcar of a train, looking to the left and looking to the right, everywhere he went, looking down upon the human condition and reporting it back to the world. And I think as a songwriter, that's a good mission statement right there.
Yeah. Well, we could use that right now.
I think so.
You got to wonder what Woody Guthrie would he be writing these days.
He'd have plenty to write about, wouldn't he?
He sure would.
But the thing about it is, if you listen to his songs from back then and apply them to now, they're pretty well on the money in a lot of ways.
It's the same stuff. It's it's greed, it's power, corruption, it's
just
all that stuff.
It just goes in cycles.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your latest record that's about to come out. I know that Mike Campbell produced it, and I haven't heard the whole record, but I did watch that video. It's like desert, kind of psychedelic, cool song. And I heard that the couple songs that are up in Spotify, there's that great surf tune, Torpedo. So tell me what that was like working with Mike Campbell. What did having a guy like that in the room with you do? Did he push you into some places that you guys wouldn't have gone?
Absolutely. That's why I came out here. Campbell and I go back to the early 90s, back to the Johnny Cash days. There was John did a record with Rick Rubin out at Sound City, and it was called Unchained, I think it was called.
Right.
I think. And the band on the record was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and me. And there was this song called Rusty Cage that Rick Rubin had pitched to John, and John just didn't get it. He just didn't quite think it was his deal. And so Rick asked me and Mike to stay over after the session that night, and let's come up with something that might be a little more presentable to John. And so I remember I think the lick was da 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 da, that thing. And so I think I had that going, which is basically a Johnny Cash lick. And Mike had another thing. So it was just me and Mike, and Rick Rubin was standing over here with a handheld mic doing like a tone poem to Rusty Cage. And that's where me and Campbell really became pals. And from that day forward, not long after that, I did a record called The Pilgrim. And me and Mike wrote a song called Dragging Around These Chains of Love that he came to Nashville and recorded. But he's just always been a guitar pal, and I love what the Heartbreakers do. And I know if you look up under the hood, a lot of that is Mike Campbell.
Yeah,
the songs are there, but Campbell is an exquisite guitar player. An exquisite
I think he's one of the most influential rock and roll guitar players of all time. I mean, I hear his name referenced in the studio in just about any rock and roll environment, almost more than anybody else.
And then you get into the arrangement side of Mike Campbell. He is a great arranger. So back to your question about this Way Out West record. When I first put the Superlatives together, from the first rehearsal, I knew that we weren't about chasing 3-minute hits up and down Music Row anymore. It was a much broader statement. And I was in New York City and went into Bleecker Bob's record store. Stay out of there. You'll spend all your allowance.
I know it well.
Yeah, you do. But there was a linen-covered box set, the Ella Fitzgerald Verve years. You know, remember the old jazz label Verve? And so I bought it just because it looked pretty, but when I got into it, it was like Ella sings Porgy and Bess, Ella sings with Louis Armstrong, Ella sings with this one, Ella does this, and there's this many Ella Fitzgerald records. And I thought, man, that is the way to live a mature musical life right there. So we started the Superlatives by going, I think Soul's Chapel was one of the first records, Delta gospel music, like Staples family, the disappearing sound of Delta gospel music. Badlands, tribute to the Lakota Indians, and then there was just, we've gone down the line, you know, just whatever piqued our interest at the time as a band. Let's go see about them. Merle Haggard says, you're taking care of the forgotten people. So
it's sort of continuing your work as like a collector historian.
Yeah.
You know,
and
archivist.
And the West has always been the most magical of places to me. And as a kid in Mississippi, when I heard Johnny Cash do Don't Take Your Guns to Town the first time, or Marty Robbins sing El Paso, I went, I got to go see about this place. And California was the place where the Munsters Mobile came from, and the Ventures came from, and the Pretty Girls came from, and Beach movies, and
the Birds,
and on and on and on. So it was just one of those dream places I had to go see about. And I was right. When I got here, I fell in love with it. And so Way Out West was the concept, basically a love letter to this part of the world out here and the broader sense of the West. And I knew it was not to be recorded in Nashville. I knew to authentically record it, I needed to come out here.
So
where'd you guys do it?
We did it between Mike Campbell's studio and Capitol. And I knew Mike was the one person that had a grand overview of the entire spectrum, from honky-tonk music all the way to the most deadly end of surf music and rock and roll and all points in between. And I knew that he could take the cinematic terms that I was trying to, apply to the microphone and help me out with it, and with no dog in the hunt other than to make a great record. So that was the idea, and it turned out to be probably one of the more original, snappy pieces this band has ever done, and I like it a lot.
Well, it definitely has, just from the few songs that I've heard, especially the one in that video. It looks like it was shot out by Pappy and Harriet's or something.
Yeah.
It's got that cosmic desert, Vibrolux, wah, 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 thing going. I love it. It's cool.
Well, the other thing is that most country guys, when they, you mentioned California, they go straight to Bakersfield and sit down with their, tribute in Bakersfield, and that is absolutely a part of the equation here, without question. But I just wanted to hit it from a little different angle. The first time I ever saw the stars align was in 1973. Lester Flatt did this concert at Michigan State University. And check this out, Chris. It was Lester Flatt, Chick Corea, and Kool and the Gang.
Oh, my God. What a lineup.
I thought,
who booked that, man? Jesus.
It was one of those college bar showcases where, representatives from universities come and, buy talent for their schools.
Right.
Well, unknowingly, the movie Deliverance was out. And unknowingly, Lester Flatt had been playing, dueling banjos on this show for years. And so I thought, I watched a little bit of Chick Corea, and I thought, they're going to laugh us off the stage. But we got out there, and we played dueling banjos, and it encored. And it was like a 45-minute set, and we encored 9 times inside of that one set. And it was just crazy. The agent the next day booked Lester on like 72 or 79 college shows. So we were rock stars.
Right. Well, there was that crazy thing of this weird connection between bands like obviously the Byrds, but like the Grateful Dead and all that sort of hippie thing and that traditional American music. But it's hard to imagine all of them being in a room together.
Well, that's the point. We played Michigan State University, and the opening act was Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris.
Wow.
Then Lester Flatt played, and then the Eagles were out touring Desperado. So that was the first time, and I was familiar with the Sweetheart of the Rodeo record by living at Roland White's house, but that was the first time that I'd ever seen gospel and honky-tonk and bluegrass and folk music and rock and roll and straight country music collide. And I went in there and I was going, man, this is the way to live a musical life.
I mean, what did the traditional country music people think about all these crazy hippie rock and roll people that were digging their music?
I don't think they knew what to do with it. Because, I mean, country music at that time, this is the late 60s, early 70s. I remember we went on one family vacation down to Panama City, Florida, and there were billboards that says, "Beautify America and get a haircut." And there was pictures of hippie, But the Byrds, there's a famous story. The Byrds came to Nashville to honor country music and do some of their Sweetheart of the Rodeo record on the Opry, and they were booed.
Right.
It just didn't work at that time because, man, those old timers and the country music audience at that time, it was almost like a religion to them. And to see this end of America come infringe upon, that kind of sanitized end of honky-tonk world, it didn't work. But as time went on, it softened. But I've always thought, and if you look through history, come on, country music was sinking in the early 70s. It took the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, who was a rock and roll band at the time, to do Will the Circle Be Unbroken, to shine the light on Mother Maybelle Carter and Earl Scruggs and Vassar Clements and Roy Acuff and Jimmy Martin, because the country music world had basically dismissed those guys.
Right.
The same thing happened with the movie Deliverance. It took a movie to shine the light on that. And if you move forward into like, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Right.
Same kind of thing.
Right.
So oftentimes it took Johnny Cash hooking up with Rick Rubin before, the world gave a shit about him again.
Right. Sure.
So a lot of times you have to step outside of the framework of what you think you are to be noticed again.
Well, it's interesting, I grew up, I was born in 1971, so part of just the the fabric of the culture was always
My
the
mandolin's
Eagles.
older than you are.
Well, I can tell. I'm looking at it. It's got some signatures that are a lot older than me on it. Yeah, but so this is always kind of fascinating me because all those bands that you just mentioned, like the Eagles or like Graham Parsons, wound up having such an influence on mainstream country music down the road that in my head I always thought. I just thought of the Eagles as like a country band, basically. But it's funny when you listen back to what country music actually sounded like at the time that they came out. It sounded nothing like the Eagles. It was a completely different thing,
Interesting point. The downbeat of country music in the world, in my mind, was 1927, the Bristol Sessions. That was the big boom of the country music industry. And that was when Ralph Peer recorded the Carter Family and Jimmie Rodgers in 1 week, and then all those other stars up in Bristol. Well, that was country music, and the audience loved it. Well, in 1937, Bill Monroe came along, and he started taking Jimmie Rodgers songs, putting them way up in a high key, singing them in a lady's voice, and playing like a fierce mandolin under them. And I read a review one time that said, country music is going to hell. This Monroe guy is bastardizing Jimmie Rodgers songs, singing in a woman's voice in a fiery tempo. Well, that's when the push and pull started. What is country music? What makes country music country music? But country music from the get-go, from the minute it started, I do believe always wanted to be a pop star. Always wanted to be accepted inside of pop culture. Well, we made it. I saw Keith Urban at the Oscars last night. And there's red carpet, country music stars on every red carpet ceremony you can think of. So mainstream we're in. But the part of country music that speaks to me the loudest is the roots element. That's where, in my opinion, the fire and the authenticity is. And everybody has their own version of the word authenticity. What's authentic to me probably isn't authentic to Taylor Swift.
Right.
But I get it. But if you go back to the textbook of the things that the oak tree part of this thing and the bedrock and the foundational part of it that has never moved and will always supply the power as an empowering force to whatever the trend is at the top. I think that's something you can always keep your eye on and count on. And other than that, it's going to come and go because it has become pop culture.
Well said. That's perfect.
I've researched this.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, it's well thought out. That's you just expressed that perfectly. I mean, how have you, through all the the different phases of your career and where you're at right now, how have you maintained such a vibrant musical life? Like, it just seems like you're somebody that always has, whether it's like a photo book or your TV show or whatever, or your archive of stuff. Like, it just seems like you're always doing something cool.
I'm glad you think so. You and one other person sometimes. I follow my heart. That's a trite statement, but I swear I get up and I go, what? And Roger Miller told me one time, he said, I never write what's on the chart. I always look for the holes. Oh, that's pretty cool. And I look for, things that sometimes, in my opinion, and this is simply my opinion, needs to be said or somebody needs to stand up for it because it looks to me like it's getting lost. There was an old builder. I always see it in architectural terms. There is a guy who just passed away in Nashville. His name is Braxton Dixon. He's the guy that built Johnny Cash's house. He built the house Connie and me lived in next door to John and June, Roy Orbison's house. I called him Frank Lloyd Wrong because he was the first guy in that part of the country back in the 50s. He would he would take down old warehouses or whatever for the timbers. And then he would take down an old mansion, and all of a sudden he would put a chandelier from this mansion with the timbers. But what I learned off of Braxton is he never threw anything away. If it took 20 years, he would hang on to those. In his mind, they were treasures, and put it in the right setting, and it would come to life again. And I see that a lot about country music, the people, the old timers, or the whoever, or a guitar, or a lyric, or whatever. If you hang on to it long enough, it usually finds its place.
Right.
And I guess I'm a treasure hunter in that sense.
Speaking of treasure hunting, I just wanted, before we wrap this up, I got to know the story behind this. How did you come upon Clarence White's B-Bender? How did that wind up in your hands?
Well, Susie, his wife, is where I got it. Roland White, if you go back and remember, Roland was the guy that got me my job with Lester Flatt. And I lived with Roland and his family when I first went to Nashville. My mom and dad and my sister came up from Mississippi a couple of years later. So after Roland left, how did it work out? Roland left just a few months after I went to work with Lester to come back out to California. Clarence had left the Byrds, and he and Roland and Eric, their other brother, put their old Kentucky Colonels bluegrass band back together. So they went to Sweden and Holland and Europe to get their wheels up. Clarence had started a solo record on Warner Brothers. Well, tragedy struck, when Clarence was 29 years old. They had played a club up here. Was it Pomona or Palmdale? And after the show, Clarence was loading his amp in the car, and this drunk driver came around the corner and ran over him and killed him. So there that went. So this was 1973. In 1980, Susie, Clarence's wife, moved back to the East Coast. She was from Kentucky. And she started coming to Roland and Arlene's house a good bit. And she brought the kids, Bradley and Michelle. So they were like family. Susie and Bradley and Michelle were like family to me. And she called me one night. I just got a job with Johnny Cash, I remember. And she had heard about it. She called me to congratulate me. And she also said, I need to sell some things. She said, just to kind of get started again. She said, I've got a 1954 Stratocaster that belonged to Clarence. And some nudie suits and some bird stuff if you want to come take a look at it. I said, I'll be there. So we found a day, and I took Roland's son, Lawrence. We go to Elkhorn City, Kentucky, to Susie and Bradley and Michelle's house. And so we go upstairs, and she shows me this 54 Stratocaster, and there was one or two pickups missing that they had used as a parts guitar for the pull string. I said, sure, I'll take it, whatever. And I said, is the pull string here? She said, that's what you really want to see it. And when I said, of course it's what I want to see. It was in an attic, in a bird's case, in a road case. And so we opened the lid on the case, and it was missing a string. And I played it, and I couldn't believe I was holding it.
Yeah.
And so she says, that's the one you want, isn't it? And I went, what do you mean it's what I want? I said, of course. She says, let me think about it. So in a little bit, she said, I'll sell the Stratocaster, the pull string, the nudie suits, and the Birds paraphernalia if you want it. I said, done deal.
Sold.
So I laid my checkbook on the kitchen table, and I said, put in any number you want to within reason, and if I don't have it, my mom works at a bank, I'll borrow it. And so I saw her writing, and she handed it back to me. It said $1,450. I said, Susie, you made a mistake. The E string on that guitar is worth more than that. She said, no. I said, come on, think about this. And she wouldn't. She says, this is what I need. This is what I want. Clarence would want you to have it. And that's how the guitar came to me.
And you play it like all the time, right? I mean, I feel like I see you playing that thing a lot.
The first show I'd ever played on, I think, was Saturday Night Live with Johnny Cash. I went to Manny's and bought a gig bag, and it became my baby, and it is my main guitar.
I mean, how does it stack up versus like the newfangled B-benders? Does that thing still work?
It works like a charm. The only thing I can tell you is you can put 100 Telecasters in a row, and that guitar has a little something extra and special in it, and I can close my eyes and I know when somebody touched it.
Right.
It's a really special, one-of-a-kind guitar.
Well, Clarence White is one of those guys whose name is mentioned all the time as an influence, but in getting ready to interview you, I was thinking about, like, I only really know, I guess, like, Sweethearts of the Rodeo. He played on that one, right?
You need to listen to... there's a Birds record called Untitled, and there's a double record. One is a studio set, and one is a live concert. Then there's Birds at Royal Albert Hall. There's a lot of board tapes out there of the Birds, and I'm telling you.
What about Kentucky Colonels? Is there any recordings of that?
Oh, there's a lot of Kentucky Colonels bluegrass records. That was where they came from, and then Clarence just kind of morphed. And as a session player, Clarence played on a lot of Everly Brothers records out here, Wayne Stewart records out here.
Oh, really?
He was an active session player. If you really want to hear some playing, there's a record called Nashville West, and that is a record that Gene Parsons, the guy who developed the B-string bender with Clarence, the drummer for the Birds, a guy named Gib Gilbo, I think the bass player was John York. They had a honky-tonk band that they just played out around here at little clubs. And this is before Clarence got the B-string bender. And I'm telling you, it is some of the most mighty Telecaster playing I've ever heard in my life.
Really?
It's so innovative, and it's fresh, and it's off on its own trail. So there's a lot of stuff I can turn you on to from Clarence.
I'm gonna dig into those. It's an interesting thing with guys like you in country music that are as advanced on their craft as you are always seem to have another guitar player who rips in the band too. And there's all this like musical camaraderie going on that I don't feel like you see in a lot of other genres.
I started my first band when I was 9 years old. And what inspired me to start that band was the Buckaroos and Roy Nichols, who played with Merle.
Yeah, sure.
And Luther Perkins, who played with John. I mean, it was in my mind, it was a guitar band. And that's the
You
kind
look
of...
at some of those Merle records, it's like Roy Nichols.
James Burton.
Right, yeah.
There was a guy
Glenn
named
Campbell, like
Phil
those three
Ball.
guys all in the same
God,
session.
It's stupid. It's just stupid, the amount of good guitar playing that those guys laid down. There's a guy out here named Gene Moles, who was one of the
Bakersfield guy, right?
Bakersfield guy who was like worked at Mosrite.
Right.
And Gene Moles was probably the first guy to play that clean, fat telly tone. I don't think he did it on a telly, but he was an awesome guitar player.
How come it became the telly? When you look at the old footage from the 50s and 60s of all those honky-tonk guys, there's a lot of other guitars that they're playing. It wasn't, the uniform hadn't set in yet, you know?
Buck Owens told me one time it was to cut through the crowd, the noise of the crowd of a honky-tonk. Because, if you look at some of those old photographs, him and Don Rich are playing through the same amp.
Right.
Sometimes they're singing through that amp.
Yeah.
And so I think just the raucous end of that honky-tonk sound, absolutely, it had to be dealt with in a sense of volume. And I think the Telecaster was like the ice pick that could cut through all that.
Right. Are you ever going to do, or have you ever done an instructional DVD of any kind? That sort of thing?
I couldn't tell you what I did if my life depended on it. Do you remember?
I just want to see some of your guitar leads slowed down in like half.
Do you remember?
I can cop the licks.
One of my favorite musicians on planet Earth was Ralph Mooney, the steel guitar player that played on so many of those Merle Haggard and Buck Owens, and then later Waylon Jennings records. Mooney was my all-time hero. I'm a bad excuse as a Ralph Mooney player because he played
Were
the
you
steel.
copping his licks?
So much because he played the steel like it was a guitar. He had really had a lot of guitar flair to it, and so with that pull string, there's a lot of Moon in my guitar playing. And every time I hear Moon play, I see palm trees and I see the California sky and everything just lights up. But I was at a steel guitar convention, back to showing people what you can do. And Mooney was one of those guys, he didn't know what he was going to play when he sat down. It just rolled out of his heart.
Yeah.
He would just responded to the song and to the singer of the situation. But I was at the steel guitar convention one time to watch him play. And there was another guy from out here named Speedy West.
Sure.
So Speedy and Moon were standing there together, and this guy from England comes up, and they know everything. And he says, "Mr. Mooney," he says, "you played on a Win Stewart recording called Barfly. And after the solo, you went," and he was trying to explain to Mooney what he played as behind the singer after the solo. And Mooney said, "Oh, I don't even remember that old record." He said, "We're just making stuff up." Just kind of blew him off. And the guy said, No. He says, "How you did it was," and he tried to tell him, but he was trying to dig deeper. Mooney said, "I didn't even like me back then." And then the guy kept pushing him, and he finally said, "Listen, it ain't none of your business what I played back then." But that was his way of saying, I don't know what I played back then, and I don't know what I play,
Yeah.
I make it up as I go.
That's funny. I had a funny experience that a couple weekends ago when I was out there in Nashville, and I went to go see Robbie play. That night, I got there a little bit early, and there was like this shop open that had Ernest Tubbs' old tour bus. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, it's just like in this store. So I went on there, and I'm like looking at, wow, that's so cool. This is what a tour bus used to look like, And then I walk over to the club, and Robbie introduces me to a guy that used to play steel for Ernest Tubb.
Lynn Owsley.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, how bizarre is that? That you just, like a minute ago, I was like, dude, I was just on the bus that you must have been touring. I was like, oh, yeah, over there, yeah.
Well, to pitch one back at you, I mean, look at you. I mean, you have inspired a generation of kids to pick up a guitar. And you're getting that now, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think with Foo Fighters, it's cool because there's just not that many. It seems like guitar bands went the way of the dodo for a while, and there's just a handful. Now there's like a lot of young, good rock guitar bands, cropping up.
Well, but I think you're responsible for a lot of that, and you're playing
Thank
this,
you.
and I think a lot of kids look to you And the next thing that we have coming as a band, we couldn't quit. We've got like 20 hillbilly surf band songs cut.
Oh,
And,
wow.
But the mentality of it, as Kenny and I talked about, going back to our garages, going back to the time when we were listening, picking up our first cool guitar and thinking we looked cool in the mirror and, hoping girls liked us. It went back to that, and the hope is that it would inspire some kid to pick up a guitar and go. Yeah. And I know you're doing that if you're into things, and that's really cool.
I sure hope so.
I know you
That's
are.
very nice to hear. Thank you. All right. Let's play some music.
All right. Get your guitar.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
You ever heard Waymore's Blues?
Yeah, how's that one go?
Early one morning, it was drizzling rain. That thing. Ain't nothing to it. Do this for Robbie Turner. Early one morning, it was drizzling rain. Round the curb come a passenger train. Heard somebody yodel and a hobo moan. Jimmy, he's dead, he's been a long time gone. Been a long time gone. He's been a long time gone. That's all there is. If you wanna get to heaven, got a D-I-E. You gotta put on your coat and T-I-E. If you wanna get the rabbit out of the L-O-G, make a commotion like a D-O-G, like a D-O-G. Like a D-O-G. Play the blues, Chris. All right. Yeah. Well, I got my name painted on my shirt. Ain't no ordinary dude. I don't have to work. Don't have to work. Like a D-O-G. I got a good woman, what's the matter with me? What makes me wanna love every woman I see? I was trifling when I met her, trifling again. And every woman I see looks like the place I came in. Place I came in. Play it, boy. Keep playing, son. Come on.
Man, you're good.
You is too.
That was great, man. That was so much fun. Sorry, I was flubbing the chords left and right there, but I was trying to keep up.
We made it up as we went.
That's
as
true.
it should be.
That's That's the 2017 version.
That's right.
There you go. Yeah.
Once in a lifetime.
It's an exclusive.
That's right.
Good.
Waylon had a cool line one time. He told me, there's always one more way to do it, and that's your way. I like that.
Big old curves. Then the pill kicked in, and I fell down. Then the world went a spinning.
Oh yeah, that was Sir Marty Stuart on Walking the Floor, doing an awesome acoustic version of Waymore's Blues. Hope I didn't screw that up too much. Anyway, check out Marty's new record, Way Out West, out now. You can see where he's going and what he's up to on martystewart.net. And you can find him on Twitter at MartyStewartHQ to get all your Marty Stuart information. Check it out. And while you're doing that, listen to all the old episodes of Walking the Floor up in the iTunes store. They're all there, baby. Get them. And get on over to ChrisShiflettMusic.com because it's going to be relaunched soon, and it'll have all your tour date information, your pre-order information, just all your information. Now, normally I end things here with these interviews, but once the interview ended, we actually we continued our conversation a little bit, and there was some good stuff in that too. So I'm just going to turn the microphone back on, give you a little bonus. This is like a Marty Stuart interview bonus track. So I hope you enjoy it. This is Chris Shiflett on Walking the Floor. Adios, amigos!
Bill slipped out the front gate. I know more, but I won't tell.
Yeah.
He dealt me.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to those records like that, like the stuff that he was doing in the 70s up into the early 80s. Like, I always wonder, like listening back to some of those records, if they were just winging it in the studio. Because the arrangements sometimes on those records, a lot of, even like whether it's Waylon Jennings or the Stones or whoever it is, it seems like the arrangements on a lot of those records aren't like necessarily something if you were sitting down and going, first chorus, then we're going to throw a bridge in. You know what I mean? They just kind of cruise almost. It seems like they're just kind of reacting in the room, you know?
I like that song that Waylon did called "Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way?"
Sure. 2 chords.
And I asked him about it one time. He said I was headed to the studio and the song just started coming. And he said by the time I got there, I had it, and I walked in the room and said, "Just follow me. It's indeed." And he said they basically just hung on to his coattail, and at the end of the song, they had a record, you know?
Right.
And I like those kind of songs.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because it's like breaks all convention. Like that song is so crazy because I played that song a lot live, like with my cover band that I had for a while. And no matter what kind of show you're having, that song, people just, get out of their seats and start moving.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. And it's not like it's like some big hooky melody, you know what I mean? It's just something about that
feeling.
floor on the floor and the way that feels and the words.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, thank you. Thanks a million. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Fuck, anytime.
Keep it rocking.
I'm trying. YouTube.